Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, muli muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so delighted and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show, and please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Good Pods, wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is Michelle House. She is here to celebrate her beautiful picture book, hopefully, The Scarecrow. Hey, Michelle, how are you?
I am well. How are you?
I'm wonderful. I have to ask you, is it hopefully The Scarecrow, an incomplete sentence, or is it hopefully The Scarecrow? That's his name.
Well, it's both.
Oh, okay.
Because in the story, the young main character protagonist girl is reading to the Scarecrow, and then she says things to him like, hopefully you'll be okay in the shed this winter. And he hears, hopefully you'll be okay in the shed this winter. And he realizes, at least in his straw brain, that his name is Hopefully.
Wonderful. That's very, very cool. And I just learned something. And it's wonderful. You know, you were telling me before we started recording that you're from a rural part of the world. I never knew that you put scarecrows away for the winter. I thought they just hung out there.
Yeah. We always did in the farm gardens. We would, when they'd done their job and the crops were not there anymore, you know, why let him sit out there and get snowed on and frozen?
It's really neat, the idea that, because lots of kids have relationships with inanimate objects. Most kids, it's with the stuffed animal. With my daughter, it was with a little unicorn she called Uni. She wasn't very original when she named her things. But, you know, I guess it makes perfect sense out on the farm that kids might develop a relationship or have conversations with scarecrows.
Sure. I've seen kids read to just about anything and everything. I raised the kids on a farm, and they used to, my daughters used to go outside and read to the cattle. And so, you know, the cattle are certainly not inanimate at all. Mm-hmm. But yes, I've seen kids, you know, read to just about anyone who will, anything. And, you know, a scarecrow can't get up and walk away. So that's a captive audience.
Yeah. You know, my mind works in such mysterious ways. It probably doesn't work. But I just had a flashback to a bicycle trip that I took when I was very young, many decades ago, through the beautiful province of Nova Scotia. And I was riding along this very rural country road, and the skies opened up, and it started raining. And I had to get off my bicycle, and I found some shelter underneath a tree on a farm. And I was surrounded by a bunch of cows, which was weird for the city boy to do. And we were just kind of hanging out. And I know I was talking to cows, and a farmer came along and said, "Hey, it looks like you're getting wet." And I turned to the cow and made a smart remark. You know, this is, I'm thinking, you know, right away, obviously, if you're living on a farm, this would be a great book for kids to read. There's all sorts of familiar things and images that they're going to see. But I'm thinking that this would be a really fun book for a family in the city to read, because it's going to take them to a place that they probably haven't visited.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you know, people grow things everywhere. I've seen the most elaborate, wonderful rooftop gardens, you know, in big cities even, and small towns, and even in your backyard, people have gardens. Anywhere you have gardens, you have things that you don't want the birds to get. So, you know, scarecrows are possible just about anywhere.
Yeah, and my wife doesn't use a scarecrow for the plants, the many plants she has out on her deck. She uses pinwheels.
Yes, those reflective pinwheels.
Yep.
And I live by a lake now, and I put the pinwheels out to keep the Canada geese off my lawn. And they work sometimes.
I was going to say, how does that work for you? The Canada geese, the endangered, there's a bazillion of them, Canada geese.
Exactly.
And their droppings are as big as most dogs. What inspired you to write, hopefully, The Scarecrow?
Well, I was afraid to write Hopefully the Scarecrow because I knew from the beginning I was going to break one of the rules of picture books, one of the rules of writing for children, and especially, well, picture books, middle grade, both. And I had published both before. But one of the things that we hear often as picture book writers, and it's good advice, is that our main character must have agency, must be active, must be the agent of change in their world, must figure out how to solve their own problems. We often struggle as writers for children to get the parents out of our book, to get all the adults out of our way. And, you know, when you read picture books and there's a 3 or 4-year-old main character, it's always like, well, where's the mom and dad in this story? You know, but we intentionally do that. We intentionally send them to the store, or if you, right away I'm thinking about The Cat in the Hat and Thing 1 and Thing 2 and all of that happened because mom was away. So my main character is none of that. He has no agency. There's no one more helpless than an inanimate scarecrow on a stick who can't move, who can't speak. But in true picture book magic, he can think, and he thinks a lot, and he thinks about his environment, and he thinks about the things that happen to him, the people who are kind to him, and then later in the story, the things that are unkind to him, the sun, the wind, the rain. He ends up in pretty bad shape by the almost end of the book because of the elements. And I set out to write a story with a main character like Hopefully the Scarecrow because in my work as a speech pathologist in an elementary school, I had come across a lot, sadly, too many young kids, as young as 1st and 2nd grade, who already felt helpless in their position in life. Something had happened. Many things often had happened. I saw a lot of kids being raised by grandparents. I saw a lot of kids in foster care. I saw a lot of kids who had been disappointed by the adults in their life already at 6 or 7. And some of them were even able to articulate that to me, that, what does it matter? They're going to not show up anyway, or they're going to not sign my field trip permission slip, or they're going to not come to my baseball game, or, so whatever it was that had disappointed the child, they felt very little control over. And with their little bodies and their little circumstances, they really didn't have much control. But they did have control over their thoughts and whether they maintained hopefulness and how they viewed the world around them. And so that was how Hopefully was born in my mind, was I wanted to give kids a protagonist that maybe doesn't have a lot of ability to change his circumstances, but can certainly change or control how he feels.
I really love that. There are lots of adults who could use that message. I mean, not really, because,
right.
and obviously lots of kids too that, stuff just happens to them. And a lot of kids and a lot of adults just kind of say, nothing I can do.
Right.
And I think that's, it's a horrible way to have to go through life. Mm-hmm. It really is. And it's an unnecessary way to go through life, because if we can help inspire kids and adults to understand that they have control over their thoughts, over their perspective, that they can make a difference in their life and that their life can be better.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I think the catalyst of hope in the book for our Scarecrow friend, and also for a lot of us, is through stories and books.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I wanted him to get his courage and his bravery. So the young girl that comes to read to him, reads him scary stories and stories of monsters and oceans and kings and queens and other scarecrows. And he keeps all those stories in his head. And I think about that's how a lot of young children find their courage and
Mm-hmm.
their hope and their bravery, is through experiencing things in books.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned foster kids. We had an author on about 2 years ago, and he was a foster kid, and he grew up in an abusive foster home, and it was an angel came into his life, one of the neighbors, who gave him books, and it was through reading books and stories alone, hiding in his room, that gave him hope. And now he is an incredibly successful business person.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, not all foster homes are bad,
No,
but the
absolutely
common denominator, and many foster homes are wonderful. But the common denominator for children, whether they're in a good foster home or a bad foster home, is some adult in their life has let them down,
Mm-hmm.
or they wouldn't have gotten to where they are now. And that's the kid that I hope reads hopefully and finds some courage.
Now, this might sound like a dumb question. I apologize if it does, but you mentioned that you're a speech pathologist, and that in your role, you met many kids who had these circumstances. Is it just that you're working in schools and you just happen to see these kids, or do you think there's some kind of link between kids having these speech challenges and growing up in situations where they've been let down?
Oh, that's not a dumb question. No, that's a good question. I would say that as a speech pathologist in a school, I was lucky enough to be assigned to one building, to one age group, one set of classrooms. So I got to know lots of kids, whether they were, quote, my speech kids or
Mm-hmm.
not. So I don't think that the experience of having adults have let you down was related to their speech disorders in any way, although kids with speech disorders often find frustration
Mm-hmm.
everywhere, because when you can't be understood and you can't communicate clearly and effectively, it's very frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
And a child often feels, I'm the problem, they can't understand me. And some of them speak less in public, I think that definitely my speech kids had the experience of not being understood, or not feeling like their message had gotten across.
Yeah. I'm curious as to what the agents and the publishers and whatnot in your life, how they reacted to this really kind of rebel book. You're going out there breaking all the rules.
Well, I pulled out my file of rejections.
Oh, good.
And I didn't count them. I know a lot of people know exactly how many times their stories were rejected before that agent or the editor said, yes, I love this. But I haven't counted, but I know, that no fewer than a dozen, editors read the story, said it was sweet, gentle, and here's a word that writers sometimes say, quiet. So quiet picture books, run their course. Sometimes they're very popular. Sometimes they're the kiss of death for a manuscript. It's too quiet, we hear often. But yet there's room in the world for those quiet books. Those are the ones where we're snuggled on an adult's lap listening to a story, and the before bedtime stories need to be a little quieter. And so I did, many editors said nice things and ultimately no thanks. But Cheryl Ising at Flamingo, which is a new imprint of Philomel, Penguin Random House, she saw Hopefully and wanted it, and that's where it landed, and I'm so happy.
Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So tough to get those letters. It's not you, it's me.
Authors have to have thick skins. We get rejections.
Well, they do. They do. And, resiliency is something that we've celebrated here on the podcast a lot. And I don't think, I'm hoping it's changing, but I know that there went for a long time, parents, there was a movement amongst parents to really kind of bubble wrap their kids and not to let their kids experience any bumps or bruises or scrapes to their bodies or to their emotions. And it's a very unrealistic way to grow up. And if a kid does grow up without any of those bumps or bruises and learn how to deal with them, they have a very uncomfortable young adulthood, I think, because at some point they're going to get bumped.
Right, exactly. Well, and I also think there's been a lot of discussion in the last 5 to 10 years about some of the more challenging subjects of picture books. And not all picture books are happy bunnies and rainbows, but some depict the challenges that kids go through in life. And that's okay. The kids need to, maybe it's easier for a child to handle some of the bumps and scrapes you're talking about when they've already read about a favorite character that has endured. And so, I think of picture books like, one of my favorite picture books is The Rabbit Listened by Corey Dorfield. And in that book, we see a child going through all the stages of anger, frustration. And I'm so happy that we can write books like that now. And then there was a long discussion a few years ago between Kate DiCamillo and Matt De La Pena about the hard stuff in children's picture books. And those two discussions were published in Time magazine, and they were open letters, one to the other, Matt to Kate, and then Kate answered with a response. In Matt De La Pena's picture book, Love, illustrated by Lauren Long, there's a picture of a child under a piano. And on the piano, there's an old-fashioned glass, and there's some tipped-over furniture. And we see adults in the spread, we see adults that have been fighting. I think we see a mother with her hands over her face and a father walking away and a child in the middle of all this. And there was a lot of discussion. I've heard Lauren Long speak about it as well between the editors about whether that should be in the book or not. And in the end, it stayed in the book. And the book is about love. It's gorgeous. It's, so uplifting and so wonderful. But then there's this little, there's this dark moment, and kids experience those. Kids experience those moments where they're not sure that they're safe or that things are okay in their life. So, I think that reading about those bumps and scrapes helps them get through those bumps and scrapes, whether they come sooner or later in life.
I agree. I think it's so very important. And we've talked here a lot on the podcast about the fact that reading about a character in a book surviving certain situations can really inspire others. And and help kids kind of formulate and imagine in their own minds how they might deal with difficult situations in their lives.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are, we're really thankful that there are rebels like you out there that are willing to break the rules, because I think it's so important, because there's probably been a lot of rules that, and probably a lot of unwritten rules that have kept children's books kind of, locked, unwilling to deal with certain situations and not depict certain people. I think we're living in a time now where there are lots more kids represented in the pages of kids' books.
Right.
Letting kids see themselves portrayed positively in the pages of the books, letting others see, letting all kids see people from different cultures and races in a more positive light. And so I'm glad that that there are people who are willing to break those rules.
Right.
And what other rule are you looking to break in children's writing?
Well, I think it's interesting because we hear these rules at writers' conferences, at when we read craft books and how-to books. But then when I speak with editors and agents, they just really aren't all that hung up on the rules. They want a story. They want a great story. They know when they see it. And if you're telling a wonderful story, even if it breaks a rule, go ahead and tell the story. I feel like maybe writers, we are the ones hung up on the rules, versus the publishers, editors, and agents being so rigid about these supposed rules that exist out there. So what rule would I like to break next? Well, I think I already broke it, but I'm going to break it even further someday. This is my 13th book, and I've been all over the place. Picture books, middle grade, fiction, nonfiction, biographies. And, the advice we hear career-wise is, if I had 13 YA novels, or I had 13 picture books, maybe I would be somewhere further along in my career. But I love writing across genres and across ages. And I even started my very first YA novel. I don't know, whether it'll ever get published. It's a whole different world to write YA than picture books in middle grade. But I think that's not really a rule, but it's advice that write something, do it well.
Right.
So
yeah.
I write everything, hopefully do some of it well.
I think it would be a great challenge and maybe a real big hit if somehow you could adapt, hopefully, the Scarecrow to be appropriate for YA. Maybe add a werewolf or a vampire. Maybe hopefully saves the day. I don't know, but I think there's potential there.
Well, yeah. Well, I think the overarching message of being hopeful and remaining hopeful, even when circumstances are not going the way that you hope, that you want. I think that's a message that could certainly come across for in a middle grade novel, in a YA novel, an adult novel.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. See, that's why you're the writer and I'm the dopey podcast host. Hey, Michelle, a great picture book, of course, is made up of a great story, but it's also made up of great illustrations. Talk a little bit about the illustrations and the illustrator, please.
I'm so glad you asked about the illustrations. Hopefully the Scarecrow was illustrated by Sarah Palacios, who is a Pura Belpré honor winning illustrator. And when I first saw the illustrations for the book in color, I was just amazed. It was not what I was expecting. A fall book, a Scarecrow book, you might think would have a lot of golds and browns and the muted colors of fall. And Sarah chose to place our little, hopefully, the Scarecrow in a beautiful, vibrant location, a beautiful garden with a lot of oranges, reds, yellows, a lot of pottery, and just really bold colors. And I'm just so excited to see our Scarecrow book doesn't necessarily look like all the other Scarecrow books that are out there.
Hey, Michelle, tell us where we can go to find out more about, hopefully, the Scarecrow and the other rule-breaking books that you've created.
So you can find me at michellehoutz.com. You can find all my books there. You can find them for sale at your favorite independent children's bookstore, independent bookstore, or online at any bookseller. My Twitter and Instagram handles are at mhoutzwrites. And I also do lots and lots of school and library visits, and I book those through Terry Shea, and he has a new, great new service, I should call it, a great new service called schoolvisit.connector. And Terry is a retired teacher who hosted many, many authors at his school throughout his career. And he has recently retired and decided that his retirement gig is going to be connecting authors to schools.
Wonderful.
And so I'm super excited to be part of TJ's schoolvisit.connector. So if you want me to come to your school and library, I would love to speak to students about writing, reading, hope, a lot of things.
Sounds great. We've had a great time speaking to the author of, hopefully, The Scarecrow, the great new picture book, the great new rule-breaking picture book from our guest, Michelle Houtz. Michelle, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be best-selling author Shannon Hale. She'll be here to celebrate her brand new audiobook. It's called Best Friends. That's the next episode of the show. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Michelle Houtz. Please be sure to check out, hopefully, The Scarecrow. Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Ann O'Leary, Soji Franklin, Monica Rivera Sosa, Madison Darris. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.